John being really the one with like all the theology stuff, and the rest being kind of just a general historical testament of Jesus's life. Why are you not a no? I'm just curious.
I'm going to go with your assumption that the Gospel of Mark is the earliest Gospel. I'm fine with that for argument's sake. But you mentioned that you did not think that Jesus was portrayed as divine in Mark's Gospel, and that's where I think you're fundamentally incorrect. In fact, I would argue that Mark's Gospel portrays a more divine Jesus than even John's Gospel, which you said is the development to the later Gospels, where Jesus is really human early on, and then he becomes this divine figure. I'm going to prove you wrong by going chapter by chapter through the book of Mark, okay?
Among the more startling features of Vaticanus are its many omissions.
In the Gospels alone, it leaves out 237 words, 452 clauses, and 748 whole sentences.
Discuss added verses, particularly Mark 1:1, obviously an added after the fact, saying this is the testament of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. But I was a devout evangelical Christian, born again and all that stuff. I did summer camps and I did proselytizing, and I really thought about it one day, and it took a long time to unpack. An atheist said this to me once, and it clicked, I guess. The idea of God having to sacrifice himself onto himself, it struck a chord, when I heard that, I guess. And
okay, all right, well, let me respond with another one-liner. If you want anything done right, you have to do it yourself.
Say hello to my little friend!
If he were telling the truth, he wouldn't have told us.
Unless, of course, he knew you wouldn't believe the truth, even if he told us.
Huge and based pilled. We do.
Oh, good. How about you, man?
I'm good.
I'm Jewish.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum.
Actually, by birth. I went to Church of Christ in the U.S. for like 13 or 14 years, and then I did end up deconstructing my faith.
You gotta ask yourself a question. Do I feel lucky? Well, do you, punk?
I still have a general deist attitude, like there's probably a God, but I certainly don't believe in Jesus Christ.
Why don't you believe in Jesus Christ, man?
Yeah, just I got pretty into like biblical scholarship whenever I was sort of in my early 20s, and I don't know. I mean, I saw all the arguments. I did some courses in college for it or whatever. I took some Greek courses, and I just like can't rectify the different accounts in the Gospels, like John being really the one with like all the theology stuff. You know what I mean? And the rest being kind of just a general historical testament of Jesus's life. Why are you not a no? I'm just curious.
I'm going to go with your assumption that the Gospel of Mark is the earliest Gospel. I'm fine with that for argument's sake. But you mentioned that you did not think that Jesus was portrayed as divine in Mark's Gospel, and that's where I think you're fundamentally incorrect. In fact, I would argue that Mark's Gospel portrays a more divine Jesus than even John's Gospel, which you said is the development to the later Gospels, where Jesus is really human early on, and then he becomes this divine figure. I'm going to prove you wrong by going chapter by chapter through the book of Mark, okay? So Mark chapter 1, John the Baptist makes straight the path for who? It's Jesus, right? In Mark chapter 1, verse 3, it says, as it was written in Isaiah the prophet, behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way, a voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way for the Lord, make his path straight. If you go back to what he's quoting, it's Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3. It says, a voice of one calling, prepare the way for Yahweh in the wilderness, make a straight highway for your God in the desert. Now, when you hear Mark setting that up and saying that Isaiah the prophet says, behold, I send a messenger before your face, you're expecting Jesus to prepare the way for Yahweh, but that's not what he says is happening. It's John the Baptist preparing the way for Jesus. Who is he saying Jesus is if he's quoting Isaiah chapter 40, verse 3, where a way's prepared for Yahweh, but John the Baptist is preparing a way for Jesus. He's saying that Jesus is Yahweh. Chapter 9, then you have the Transfiguration. Chapter 9, verses 2 to 5. Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up on a mountain, and then he appears in a blinding white. And Mark says that the white is whiter than any launderer would ever be able to bleach. And who's Jesus seen on the mountain with? It's Moses and Elijah. Now, there are only two people in the Hebrew Scriptures who climb up on a mountain to commune with God. Moses in Exodus 24 and Elijah in 1 Kings 19. What if when Moses and Elijah walked up on Mount Horeb, time collapsed, and when it says that they talked with Yahweh, they were actually talking with Jesus? There are only two people who climb up on a mountain to talk to God. Those happen to be the two people who climb up on a mountain and talk with Jesus in Mark 9 in the Transfiguration. Now, I could go on chapter by chapter, but what this all does is it culminates at Mark 14 with Jesus and his trial. At Jesus' trial, they ask in Mark 14:61, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus replies, I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, coming from the clouds of heaven. He's quoting Daniel chapter 7, verses 13 to 14, where it says the divine Son of Man who rides on the clouds of heaven and is given dominion, glory, and kingship over all the nations. And it says that this reign of the Son of Man will last for an everlasting period of time. It will never pass away. And the high priest understands exactly what Jesus is saying. It says that the high priest then tears his robes and says, why do we need any more witnesses? We've heard the blasphemy. When Jesus calls himself the Son of Man and quotes Daniel chapter 7 about himself, he's putting the exclamation mark on this whole ministry. There's no ambiguity about it. Their verdict is blasphemy because Jesus is doing that. He's claiming to be God. He's already proven through Mark that he not only has the audacity to claim to be God, but he has the divine prerogative to do the things only God is able to do. It's not just a claim. Jesus is Yahweh in every chapter of the Gospel of Mark.
Let's talk. There's a lot to discuss.
Well, each one of the Gospels are focusing on different aspects of Jesus.
Yep.
And when it comes to the divinity of Jesus, yes, the Gospel of John is my favorite. Matthew is a close second. Then Luke and Mark, it's a toss-up. But that still is not answering anything for me. What was the reason why you don't believe in Jesus and the divinity of Jesus?
Yeah, I just think, as I said before, John being the only one where he claims divinity, and he just doesn't.
Time to face destiny. Time to face gravity.
In Mark, Matthew, Luke. There's some debates around that we can discuss. Added verses, particularly Mark 1:1, obviously an added after the fact, saying this is the testament of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, blah, blah, blah. Portions of that don't originate in the earliest manuscripts.
About the comparison between Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus.
They're different also in two ways. One is that Vaticanus does not have the extent of correction. That's a very critical difference. Sinaiticus is the most corrected Greek manuscript of the scriptures. The second is that Vaticanus now has a very strange appearance. When you look at it as a sort of manuscript expert, although you know that people tell you that it's a 4th century manuscript, it actually looks like a 15th century manuscript. And there's one very simple reason for that, is that almost the entire text has been overwritten by a 15th century scribe. Not only that, he's added in 15th century decoration, titling, and so forth. So it has a very strange appearance.
Is it possible that the reason Codex Vaticanus has a strange and even newer appearance is that it may not be a truly ancient manuscript? The earliest recorded date for Vaticanus is 1475 AD, when it was first entered into the record of the Vatican Library. The manuscript had formerly been rejected by Erasmus and the Reformers because they believed it was corrupt. Yet somehow, the warnings of the Reformation were completely ignored by Tischendorf and the scholars who supported him. They all embraced Vaticanus without questioning its authenticity or considering that it may have been one of Rome's many historic forgeries. Among this company of scholars was F.H.A. Scrivener, another prominent academic who also opposed Constantine Simonides. The strange thing about all of these guys, Bradshaw, Scrivener, Tregellus, Hort, all of them who supported Codex Vaticanus and who questioned Constantine Simonides. It's understandable that they would question Simonides because he had been accused of forgery. That makes sense, that they would take the time to investigate his claims. But why they did not apply the same standard to the Vatican when the Vatican has a much longer and much more provable history of forgery and fakery and fraud? Why they didn't apply the same standard when they were examining Codex Vaticanus just doesn't make any sense. And in fact, if you study what happened when Tregellus, for example, when he goes to the Vatican Library to examine Codex Vaticanus, the priest there behaved in a very strange manner. And he said while he was looking at the Codex, there were priests in the room and they were making noise and so on to try and distract him. And he said that if he spent too much time looking at any one page for too long and studying it, they would come and snatch it away, almost as though they didn't want him to have an opportunity to study it too closely. Among the more startling features of Vaticanus are its many omissions.
In the Gospels alone, it leaves out 237 words, 452 clauses, and 748 whole sentences.
Discuss added verses, particularly Mark 1:1, obviously an added after the fact, saying this is the testament of Jesus Christ, the Son of God.
Lies. Oh, lies!
And other manuscripts agree that those things are there.
While Vaticanus is known for its omissions, Sinaiticus is famous for its more than 14,000 corrections, many more than the average biblical codex. While Tischendorf reported some 14,800 corrections, once the British Library's project was complete, the number was inflated dramatically. In this BBC documentary, the latest number of corrections is given by Dr. McKendrick, along with the theological conclusions they are said to imply.
On closer inspection, the text of the Codex Sinaiticus is littered with revisions. It is history's most altered biblical manuscript, and within those changes lie its real theological secrets.
It has approximately 23,000 corrections in all that survives, which is an extraordinary rate of correction. It means that on average there are about 30 corrections on each page.
But I won't get too bogged into details here. I don't know. I can't remember when it happened, but 5 or 6 years ago or something. But I was a devout evangelical Christian, born again and all that stuff. I did summer camps and I did proselytizing and all that stuff. And I really thought about it one day, and it took a long time to unpack. An atheist said this to me once, and it clicked, I guess. The idea of God having to sacrifice himself onto himself. It struck a chord, when I heard that, I guess. And
okay, all right. Well, let me respond with another one-liner.
Say hello to my little friend!
If you want anything done right, you have to do it yourself.
Why wouldn't he do that in the form of the Father?
Because if you are going to do anything, you have to do it within the parameters of your creation. So he enters into his own creation. The Word became flesh.
Yeah, fair enough.
God with us. Jesus was God before Jesus was Jesus.
Fair enough. So do you, again, I don't want to get too much into heavy theology concepts, but do you think Jesus is co-eternal with God then?
No, Jesus is God, bro.
I understand. This is the whole Trinity.
Chosen, go ahead.
Yeah.
No, I was just saying, if you read Matthew 13:13, that'll answer your question why you don't see Jesus as God in Matthew, Mark. Okay, just ran away.
Get off my plane.
I didn't kick him. He just left.
Oh, well. I'm going to reset the live.
Okay.
I'll be back.
If he were telling the truth, he wouldn't have told us.
Unless, of course, he knew you wouldn't believe the truth, even if he told it to you.